Good evening, folks. This is The Weird Part, and I am your host, Vincent Treewell. Tonight we're going to be discussing a very unusual crime and discussing a possible solution, a possible explanation, a theory as to why it has never been solved. I'm referring to the Lane Bryant Massacre that took place in Tinley Park, a suburb of Chicago, on February 2nd, 2008. So we're coming up right on the 14th anniversary of this massacre. It's extremely unusual that there is a mass shooting and the perpetrator is not either found dead at the scene, killed in a shootout with the police, or arrested shortly thereafter. This, however, has been almost 14 years with no arrests being made and apparently no significant leads. I believe there is an explanation for that, which we will go into later. However, to set the scene, this occurred at a Lane Bryant clothing store, which is no longer there. It's a different business now. In Tinley Park. For those who might be unaware, Lane Bryant is a nationwide chain of plus-size and full-figured women's clothing. Sort of a big and tall shop for women. And it is a chain store. It's a well-known brand. And the morning of February 2nd, 2008, an unknown person entered, bound, and shot 6 women inside, 2 employees, 4 customers. 5 died. 1 was shot in the neck, but was able to play dead until the shooter had left. There is no clear motive. There is some physical evidence, some eyewitness evidence, a recording, and a fairly famous, or at least widely distributed, police artist sketch, which I've posted, and I also want to discuss shortly. This is a mass murder, a mass shooting, and I clearly remember when it happened, and it was my full expectation that, they're going to catch this guy in no time, because that always happens. Doing cursory research, I have not been able to find another case where there was a mass shooting and no one was identified, no one was caught for it in the United States in anything like recent years. I can't guarantee there isn't another, but that is extremely, extremely rare. And I think that there is a reason for that, which we will get to very quickly. One thing that I can't stress enough is that in all of the media coverage, and I've been following this story basically since it happened, and did, further research for this episode, and 100% of the time in what I've read and watched and listened to, the suspect is referred to as a man. It's just repeated over and over and over that they're looking for a man. Well, this is a plus-size women's clothing store. It seems screamingly obvious to me that maybe the killer is a woman. A big woman, because larger-sized women are the entire audience, the entire customer base of Lane Bryant. That's who goes to Lane Bryant. That's who Lane Bryant sells to. So when they describe a shooter 5'9" to 6 feet tall and somewhat over 200 pounds, they're describing a hell of a lot of the women that go to Lane Bryant. It amazes me that that has not apparently been considered in the investigation, and certainly has never been questioned in the media, that very possibly the killer was a woman. Well, you're not going to find the killer if you're exclusively looking for a man. I would like everyone who listens to this to look at the police artist's sketch and really look at it and tell me, or consider in your own mind, is that clearly a man? Because I don't get that impression. I think that that could easily be a woman. There is also audio. The audio is garbled. It's background audio from a 911 call, but you hear a voice, but I cannot determine the gender of that voice. There also has been DNA collected, which is often referred to as key to the case. But I think that, in my opinion, that's a red herring. The DNA, if I recall correctly, was taken from a coffee cup that was found at the scene. I believe that was simply a contaminated crime scene. Many people would have been present after a mass shooting, and at some point a man had drank coffee out of that cup. That's in no way determinative of who the killer was. That could have been left there by a great number of people. Also, the DNA from that coffee cup has matched to absolutely nobody. It has been a complete non-issue in this case. So it is my theory that the entire investigation of the Tinley Park Lane Bryant mass shooting has been going in the wrong direction literally since day one. So how could that happen? How could something that should be obvious be overlooked so thoroughly by the media, by law enforcement, by the public? Well, I would opine that the handling of this case reflects a larger situation in our society, and one that until very, very recently has been almost uniform, and that is that women above a certain weight and above a certain height don't exist in pop culture, with extremely rare exceptions, such as Leslie Jones, whose work, I'm a big Leslie Jones fan, but with very, very few exceptions, women above a certain weight and above a certain height do not exist in pop culture. They're invisible. And while that's just bad for art, bad for pop culture, bad for society, in this particular case, that prejudice, that exclusion of plus-sized, tall women has provided camouflage for a mass murder. The police aren't looking for her. The public is unaware of her. The media has not even mentioned, I cannot find one mention in broadcast media of this possibility. And it's been 14 years. So I think that's the source of the problem. That larger sized women have been kept invisible for so long that there's a direct link between that cultural media fact and this specific unsolved crime. Just to restate, there has been a tremendous amount of investigation of this case in the last 14 years. There has been a $100,000 reward hanging out there unclaimed, which is still, to the best of my knowledge, there's a $100,000 reward out there for anyone who can provide information leading to an arrest. There has been fingerprint, DNA evidence, and DNA evidence collected, none of which has gone anywhere. There is audio. I've posted a link. I myself didn't get much of anything out of that audio. It's barely discernible, in my opinion. Maybe somebody else can hear something in there. And most of all, there is the sketch, which was prepared from statements by the one surviving witness, who obviously was highly traumatized by this experience, as anyone would be. And again, I just ask everyone to look at that sketch. Look at the beads in the hair. Yes, there are guys who wear beads in their hair. There are guys who wear cornrows with beads in them. But there's an awful lot of women that do that too. And I'd say the great majority of people who wear that style are women. The killer's described as wearing black jeans with a sequined, or I'm looking for the right word, bedazzled back pockets. Again, there are men that wear that. I'm not up on all the styles, but there are also a lot of women that wear that. I believe that is even sold in Lane Bryant. So the person that's being described could easily be a woman, and could be a woman of exactly the target market that goes to Lane Bryant. The fact that this avenue hasn't been pursued, and I've actually felt so strongly about it that I made a tip years ago to the Tinley Park Police Department. I haven't heard anything back, but the fact that the possible female identity of the killer has never been brought up publicly and never been discussed in the press really does amaze me. I have to think that there are people out there who know who did this, or who know, I'll rephrase that. People who know the person who did this. But when you're told to look for a man, you don't tend to go and look for a woman for this type of thing, I would say. And so that's my 2 cents on this case. It's a deeply tragic case. 5 innocent people were murdered for no known reason. 1 was wounded. It was traumatic and terrible for the community. And the idea that this would go unsolved, and seemingly an investigation that's gone nowhere for 14 years staggers my imagination. There are just a couple more points I'd like to cover as I kind of wrap this up. The motive in this horrible crime is completely unknown. The police have, at least publicly, basically stuck to the theory that it was a robbery gone wrong. However, I just don't find that credible, as robbing a clothing store at opening in the morning just does not seem like a great target for a robbery. Seems like neither a target of opportunity nor a well-planned, premeditated robbery. It just doesn't make any sense to me. However, the emotional connections that someone might have with specifically a story like Lane Bryant seems to me a lot more likely as an indicator that this would be a deeply emotional crime based on something that might have happened there, some previous incident, or what Lane Bryant represented to the perpetrator. But those are things we're not going to know until someone is arrested, someone is questioned, or someone confesses. I would also like to make mention of a episode of a really great podcast, the This Is Criminal podcast, hosted by Phoebe Judge, and I'll put the link in the show notes, describing a woman named Peggy Jo Tallis, who is a serial bank robber in the 90s, and who got away with, at least temporarily, a number of crimes because she wore men's clothes, and people thought bank robber, cowboy hat and duster, therefore looking for a man, and because they were looking for a man, they overlooked her for years. And I'll have the link. It's a very good episode of a very good podcast. Also, mentioning wearing men's clothes brings up something that was in the discussion of this massacre a lot on the internet, and that was, could it have been a transgendered person? And I believe that the answer is, well, yes, it could be. Anything's possible. However, I think that someone listed in government records as male would have been a lot more likely to come up as a suspect already, which is why I stick to the theory that this was almost certainly a woman. Again, there are other possibilities, but that to me seems the strongest if you look at the big picture. So in conclusion, this is a really bizarre, possibly one-of-a-kind case, and hopefully someone out there, memory will be jogged. Perhaps someone will come forward and have some information on this, and perhaps there can be finally some resolution and some justice for the victims of an unsolved mass shooting. I'm Vincent Truewell. This is The Weird Part. Thank you for listening, and good night.